So, Robby, what's on your radar?
In previous radars, Emily Jashinsky and I have both talked at some length about a very concerning Biden administration pick, Catherine Lhamon. In May, President Biden nominated Lhamon to be Assistant Secretary for Civil Rights in the Education Department. Back in July, her nomination failed to advance out of committee since all Republicans voted against her, but Chuck Schumer brought her nomination to the floor anyway. And last week, she was confirmed by a deadlocked Senate with Vice President Kamala Harris breaking the tie. Not a single Republican voted for her in committee or during the full vote. And for good reason. Lhamon previously had this exact role, head of the Office for Civil Rights, during the Obama years. It was her job to make sure that colleges and universities were complying with Title IX, the federal statute that prohibits sex and gender-based discrimination on college campuses. Lhamon encouraged colleges to define sex discrimination very, very broadly to include all sorts of conduct. In accordance with guidance enforced by Lhamon, colleges undertook a vast diminishing of due process protections for students who were accused of sexual misconduct. No right to cross-examine the accused or hear from witnesses, no access to attorneys. In some of these cases, there were no trials at all. Now, none of this is actually required by Title IX, a short statute that says only the following. No person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any educational program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. Under Lhamon, the Education Department read that to mean universities had to railroad students and professors accused of sexual misconduct. During the Trump years, the Education Department reversed course and changed the rules in a positive direction. But now with Lhamon back in charge, who knows what will happen? Here's what she had to say when questioned in committee.
When I met, you told me that you've been painted as someone who only believes victims, but that you didn't agree with that. Would you support keeping a presumption of innocence requirement in the current Title IX rule if the Title IX rule is changed?
And again, I'm trying not to over-lawyer, but there isn't a presumption of innocence in the existing Title IX regulation.
She doesn't believe that people accused of sexual misconduct on university campuses deserve the presumption of innocence, the most basic component of justice. And she was just rehired to enforce these issues. It's terrifying. But if you've watched my previous segments on Lhamon, a lot of this isn't new for you. I've talked about the threat she poses to due process quite a bit. So I wanted to take the news of her confirmation as an opportunity to explain why Lhamon's interpretation of Title IX is not just a threat to due process, it's also a threat to free speech. That's because under Lhamon, the Education Department defines sexual misconduct so broadly that many universities worry that they could be in trouble unless they also police offensive speech relating to sex and gender. I've covered many cases of universities censoring speech that they thought could run afoul of Title IX. For instance, the City University of New York told professors not to use gendered salutations, Mr. and Mrs., for instance, because that could be a violation of Title IX. Now, it isn't a violation of Title IX, but the Obama administration was so militant about it that campuses defaulted toward absurd levels of enforcement. Now, keep in mind that even without Lhamon breathing down their necks, universities routinely violate free speech principles in obnoxious and obvious ways. Just last week, the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education, a watchdog group that defends the First Amendment on campuses, reported an insane case involving Coastal Carolina University. CCU is moving to terminate a theater professor who expressed the opinion that an extremely minor incident on campus did not merit a dramatic response from the department's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. Wrote the professor, Stephen Ernest, in reference to the matter, "Sorry, but I don't think it's a big deal. I'm just sad people get their feelings hurt so easily, and they're going into theater?" Now, what was this incident? On September 16th, a visiting artist spoke with two students of color who explained that they were hoping to connect with other non-white students on campus. The three of them subsequently wrote down the names of other students of color who might wish to connect and discuss their shared struggles. They left this list of names on a classroom's whiteboard. The next class saw it and thought that non-white students had been singled out for some nefarious purpose, and a protest was planned. The Diversity Committee investigated and swiftly cleared up the matter. Wrote the committee in an email to campus, "We believe it is important to inform the student body that the intent behind the list was a resource for new students who are looking to be in community with other students of color. Nevertheless, the committee opined the students' hurt feelings were completely valid." The email continues. "This in no way undermines the feelings that any of you feel about this incident. It should have never happened, and the committee will be discussing with faculty and students the gravity of the situation and how to handle these requests in the future." Ernest rightly objected to the tone of this email. In response, students accused him of racial insensitivity and demanded he be fired. The university instructed him not to come to class and launched an investigation. According to Ernest, the university has initiated a termination process. Despite Fire's protestation that punishing the professor is an obvious violation of his academic freedom rights, CCU has chosen a course denied it by the First Amendment, wrote Fire. We call upon CCU to abandon its current path. CCU declined a request for comment. In general, universities should stop caving to students who are unreasonably upset about minor infractions. But this wasn't an infraction at all. Campus administrators would be well advised not to put themselves in the position of being responsible for every hurt feeling, no matter how ill-founded or slight. There's little benefit to making diversity synonymous with absurdity. But with Lhamon back at the helm of the Office for Civil Rights, this kind of absurdity is about to become even more common. She turned the dial up to 11 last time she was in charge. We can only wait and see what she might do this time. And I think, so Ryan, I think it's an important thing, because I've talked about, the due process issues with Title IX enforcement a lot, but there was also a big free speech component because they interpreted this mandate so broadly that Title IX requires universities to do much more about sexual misconduct, and they're defining that to include not just behavior, but also speech. So you had a lot of cases where even legitimate classroom speech around think about a literature class discussing a work of art that includes a scene of sexual assault, and they're afraid, the professors are afraid they can't even discuss this scene because they'll have the Title IX office breathing down their necks.
Right, which isn't a necessarily unfounded fear. I don't know if it was Title IX that got involved with the Othello situation at Harvard or Yale or wherever that was.
Right.
But it was certainly an investigation that involved human resources and DEI. So,
right.
And usually, I guess that's...
They're often all wrapped up together.
So, right. So you're gonna have professors in class, I think, steer away from topics that could... That normally they would be teaching to previous generations.
And this is like I remember during the Obama years, I heard from law professors who would say they are no longer going to teach the law as it relates to sexual assault because it could be you trying to educate students on this subject could risk. You could get some Title IX investigation, which it would be terrible because we've made great strides in needing to educate the next generation of attorneys and judges about the reality that women face sexual discrimination, assault, etc., and need to be taken seriously. And we could undo that progress if you can't even educate. It would be like not being able to educate doctors because if they're squeamish about blood or something like that would be that would be ridiculous.
Right. Yeah, no, what I wonder is what's the constituency for this? What's the political upside here? It's clear what the political downside is, and the blowback that it's creating around the country is obvious. And so, what are the gains? Are there? So, let's compare it to the fight over busing and desegregation in the 60s and 70s. That created backlash. A serious backlash, but it was quite obviously pushing in the right direction. It was worth the backlash to try to push and make the world a better place because you're improving the material lives of millions of people by giving people their constitutionally protected right to desegregated schools. And to desegregated public housing and workplaces, et cetera. So if you're going to get some pushback on that, fine. That doesn't mean you don't go ahead anyway. But what is this about? Who are the people that are better off today than they were 10 years ago as a result of this? I don't, and that's an open question. And it's not just purely a rhetorical question. There may be some advances that have been made that I haven't noticed because of who I am and because of the circles that I travel in. But it's hard to see.
Yeah, I tend to think it makes a small number of activists around social justice issues, around Me Too issues or diversity issues. It makes them happy, and I don't think these people have thought through the implications or have shown or proven that they know how to assemble a coalition to advance these issues.
And if it makes them happy at the expense of the gains of the Me Too movement, then they're undermining cultural protections that were created from 2017 on by the pain and sacrifice of millions of people going forward, telling their stories, demanding accountability, and genuinely creating a better relationship and a better ability for women to function in the world without constantly being harassed. If a handful of activists undermine all of that by launching these like bizarre crusades that then just fall apart on the smallest inspection by Reason Magazine,
right?
Then they're not doing the world any good.
Not doing the world any good. I'm looking forward to your radar coming up next.